I'm Mushi and this is a mega mix of the first 3 videos of the How Strong Are Alan Becker's Stickfigures series. This is a mega compilation of green, blue, and purple. I'm going to be doing red, orange, and yellow next, but I just wanted to compile these together because oh my god, they're an hour long. Also for those that want to keep track of the series. Anyway, enjoy! A good fight-centric series doesn't just have characters who are good at combat, but it finds a way to intricately write cohesive and compelling characterization through those little quirks in combat. For a series primarily about fighting and beating up enemies and even your allies, it's time to finally ask an important question. What are the Stickfigures fighting styles? What are they good at? What tools do they use? Do they win or do they get mauled? And most importantly, what cool tricks do they have up their sleeves? And today, we're starting off this series with the stick that surprisingly has the highest number of fight scenes out of everyone, despite being known as the group alleged pacifists. Believe me, I checked. Blue, the master alchemist, the star sharpshooter, and the guy who embodies the phrase, in a group of powerful people, be wary of the one that has a friendly face or a peaceful attitude. There's a reason they're in that group to begin with. So welcome to How Strong Are Alan Becker's Stickfigures, where I break down a character's fighting style, skills, tactics, and combat movesets, and analyze how these things improve their personal characterizations. Disclaimer, this isn't your average power scaling style of video where I talk about strength and isolation for the sake of proving superiority. Also, it's not completely power that I'm after either. It's that relationship between their fighting styles and general personality that I find much more interesting. So take this more of an analysis of their general skills with occasional contrast to other characters, but by no means do I ever want to insinuate that they're less of a character than everyone else. This is especially the case with the Color Gang, where the question of who's stronger isn't the point, it's how strong are they together. So let's begin. Blue from Alan Becker's Stickfigure series is characterized as being the team's emotional restraint, known for his pacifying nature and his immensely protective and caring tendencies towards the group. He's the team chef, someone that runs after his friends' side when they need comforting, and the one that tries to de-escalate situations when he sees tensions rising between them. He's also seen visibly distraught, stressed, or panic when his other friends are hurt. He's also the team member that tends to have a calming effect on the others, mitigating their more rambunctious side by telling everyone to calm down, with the exception of Red. But that isn't to say that he isn't as prone to roughhousing as the others. He's also got his cheeky side, especially when rightfully enabled by the others' equally childish antics. He tends to go with the flow with their plans without really questioning safety, especially when it comes to Yellow, and especially when it comes to his netherwarts. But the question is, how strong is he? Let's start with combat physicality, Blue's actual fighting style.
Nice weather we're having. Die! I never told you that I'm a cold-blooded murderer! You underestimated me!
Blue has different fighting styles depending on the weapon that he's using, but they both follow the same combat philosophy, brutal frontal suffocation. Blue's goal is to encroach on your space as much as he can and make it impossible for you to dodge either his swings or his shot. Blue prefers getting as close to his enemies or kites around them with a weapon to use mobility against them. In terms of raw strength and dexterity, Blue's biggest skill is being a master acrobat both in long and short distances. One key detail that I've noticed about Blue is that he rarely actually gets hit if his intention is to dodge, and most of the time, he's only ever hit because he's distracted or unaware, which is when he has to be bailed out by another teammate, usually green like in The Witch and Bed Wars. That isn't to say that he's impervious though, as he has gotten grabbed before multiple times, especially when the enemy is much physically stronger or faster. Blue's biggest mistake during combat is either overestimating his agility or underestimating the enemy's ability to use his own engage against him. In Titan Ravager, this is the case when he tries to rod it away with Yellow. The Ravager, being much bigger, is able to counter-leverage Blue and Yellow grabbing onto it and sends them flying. In AVA 5, the Virus, Blue is grabbed by the leg when he tries to kick down the spider, misjudging just how vulnerable he was in this position because he's used to also beating it down with his friends. In Potions, he tries to crowd into the pig and incapacitate it by latching onto it, completely missing the fact that the pig is nigh invincible with how much potions it drank. making him the most ragdolled of the bunch. I also find it kind of funny that Blue is pretty quick on his assertiveness here, rather than trying to cool down the situation. It goes to show that when it's not towards people that he finds as allies, his patience isn't as long. Just like how he instantly follows Red's lead on hostility when fighting against the chef in AVA 32, despite the chef being someone that just didn't want to be robbed by complete strangers. Blue's fight choreography is different from Green's, who's also the other dexterity-based fighter of the group. Green's style is fast-paced and overwhelming swordplay that overpowers his enemies with tempered rhythm. On the other hand, Blue weaponizes distance and is the most versatile range-wise amongst the sticks. He's very intentional with how he maneuvers himself around, to, and from his enemies, depending on the weapon that he's using. Blue's attacks are linear, which leaves less room for interweaving compared to Green's, but they're meant to hit much harder and discombobulate his enemies. So, let's break down Blue's two fighting styles. First is his close-ranged capabilities. Much like the rest of the gang, Blue is highly proficient in hand-to-hand combat considering his status as a brawl stick figure. When we first see him, he's fighting against Green. Even in future episodes of Animation vs Minecraft and Animator vs Animation, Blue never exclusively changes from one style to another. Instead, he masters both of them and lets them complement each other. Blue isn't afraid of throwing his entire body at an enemy, especially if he thinks it'll be beneficial. Even when his odds are against him, he tends to move closer unless he has another option. Blue isn't the type to hide from enemies either, and when he finds even the slightest of counterattacks, he seizes the opportunity to the best of his ability. In the Nether episode, even though they were surrounded by enemies on both fronts, Blue takes the leap of faith to use the gas to their advantage. Blue's also not opposed to being the vanguard during combat, as we see him leap from the ghast to parry the fireball. This part of him is also what made him dangerous in the Bed Wars. The moment he realized that he could break the rules of Minecraft, he goes full offensive assault. He climbs onto this one guy's head and starts stabbing him in the face, he jumps back and forth between enemies, and constantly does wider cleaves to damage as much incoming attackers as possible. His goal is very obvious in this scene: uninhibited murder! In the Piglin War, he's a very efficient en-masse fighter, being able to parry and block against multiple Piglin without any problem while still making it a point to not actually hit them with the sword. In AVA 12, we see this the best when he's fighting Hazard. Instead of hiding and distancing himself with how Green and Red did it against their opponents, Blue goes for the opposite and runs at them to hard engage. He doesn't have any ranged weapons on him, so he finds no need to kite around Hazard. Ironically, Blue actually has the most options to hide or block from his enemy with the sheer amount of environmental structures around him, unlike Green and Red that had to fight in hallways. And even when he has the options to evade, Blue is still trying to block against the incoming projectiles, and his goal is very cutthroat: get to the main body and initiate contact as soon as possible. When Hazard meets him in the middle and engages, Blue does his best in a 2v1 until he's overwhelmed. Blue's also not opposed to taking unconventionally painful methods in killing his opponent, either by dropping an entire tank onto Hazard or by barbarically taking a clone to bash Hazard's head in. Despite his kind-hearted nature, he is the kind of person that would crush someone under a tube if he must. In the Chef, Blue is the most aggressive fighter alongside Yellow. He has the speed and reaction time to parry the Chef's knives, and he's the one that tries to flank the Chef to give space for Yellow to counterattack. Except he gets distracted by the book and is hit in the head Tangled style. Blue is also very efficient in grappling and displacing his allies. In the same vein that Blue prioritizes his own distance management, he leverages everyone else's and gives them opportune spaces during attack combos. In Bed Wars, there's a scene where he throws Yellow at their opponent and another one where he swings Red, Yellow, and Green over with him. In Cave Spider, he throws Red to the other side of the map to assist Green, and in Lucky Block Staff, he uses the piston block to execute chain aerial attacks with Orange, and helps him get to the blazes since Orange isn't able to fly on his own. Blue also helps Green latch onto the Ender Dragon in episode 10 by throwing him onto it. In the Ultimate Minecart, he tosses Green to the other side of the board with the help of the Speed Potion, and he climbs over Orange. Conversely, Blue also catches people when they're interrupted mid-combat or falling off of things. In AVM 37, we see this a lot with how he catches all of them once Purple's Elytra breaks, and they have to swing to the other side, or when Green and Purple are flying after Purple's Phantom was killed. In the Nether, he's quick to catch Green, who was falling off of the ghast with a fishing rod. Blue doesn't use the fishing rod often, besides to get to one place or another, in contrast to someone like Yellow who uses it to dodge. Blue's second fighting style is him being an expert marksman, and I think because it happens so much in the background, Blue's talent is heavily underappreciated, being the only one of the sticks to have their entire kit switching significantly. Blue's expertise in ranged combat comes from the original Animation vs. Minecraft, and has expanded to future episodes, including but not limited to dual pistols, a bow and arrow, hand crossbows, and an arrow turret. Blue also gets an upgrade courtesy of Yellow, where he starts shooting with fireworks. He's also been seen utilizing TNT against both enemies and allies as a form of AoE range, such as in Lucky Block's staff against the corrupted staff to defend red, green, and orange, and an ultimate minecart against those same people. He also uses TNT to bomb Green's winnings. Blue's ranged fighting style, though, doesn't stay ranged for long. Instead, it pitter-patters depending on his assessment of the situation. I'll show you two different scenes. In Cave Spider, he assesses that there's way too many enemies that could overwhelm them, and going into close range has way too much risk. In the beginning of the fight, we see how precise his shots are, able to rapid fire not only falling enemies, but also chaining his shots to either shove them into the other sticks, or shoving them away from everyone else. When he's fighting like this, he tries to find the best angles by either climbing on top of his allies or dodging out of the way of obstacles, and he interweaves his shot in between backflips and jumps. He's also great at finding the most opportune angles for his shots, such as him skewering 3 spiders at once with 1 arrow. Blue's shooting speed on the bow is what makes him a formidable duelist because his shots are almost instantaneous, and his reload speed, even on a Minecraft bow, rarely has any lag time. Whenever he jumps from one card to another or he moves backwards, he always shoots mid-action. Even when he drops down to the same level as the others, he's not stopping from providing cover fire for the rest of them. There's hardly any lag between his motions, and it goes to show that when the stakes are at their highest, Blue doesn't stop even if he could. In the raid, we also see him do a sick multi-shot against the archer, before he gets grabbed by a bear trap. On the other hand, Blue isn't afraid of getting up close and personal despite using a ranged weapon. He's held others at gunpoint multiple times, and his style is running at an enemy to make sure that they're too suffocated and too close to dodge his arrows. This is similar in the original Animation vs. Minecraft, where despite having a ranged weapon, he runs at the obsidian red to shoot him down before regretting his decision. This was also how he was fighting the King. He rarely used the bow's maximum range and instead did his best to chase down King Orange. His style during fights like this is constant barrage, with opposed to careful precision, complemented by the skeleton who was running with him providing additional fire, Purple who also held the King down during the initial group fight, and Orange who held the King down during the 2v1. We also see this style in Animator vs. Animation 9, where he runs and guns Alan's cursor only to pay the price of his misposition very dearly. Then, let's move on to his unique combat arsenal. Each of the sticks have a unique part of their kit that differentiates them from each other, and Blue's is the existence of his potions. During the entirety of the series, Blue has created multiple potions, including but not limited to immense speed, transmutation, invisibility, and musicality. During his fight against the witch, we see his speed complement his potion making really well by not only being able to craft so many in a short amount of time, but also being quick enough to change his form to best counteract the witches. We also know that he is able to enhance these potions' potency and break time-space continuum. Much like Yellow's command blocks, though, Blue uses these potions sparingly unless the plot absolutely demands it. Despite being a part of his signature kit, the narrative kind of balances him out by not making him reliant on the potions for extra strength. Instead, we do see him cultivate that talent slowly and develop over the episodes, but he never trades it away for classic training. Well, now that we have what does he do in combat, what about what he thinks in combat? Combat mentality refers to the character's mental state and attitudes throughout different phases of the fight. This goes back to what I said, that a good combat usually portrays the character first, then the fight second. Initiative judges how they, as a character, start fights, or if they even want to start fights in the first place. Engagement is their attitudes while fighting, and they're already in the meat of things. And escalation is how they end fights. Do they try to talk the other person down, or do they end fights with their fists? Combat mentality is important in understanding the other subtexts of a character's fighting style because this is where their actual personality resides in, as well as other cool instincts like adrenaline, morality, and mental fortitude. And with Blue, this is important because his archetype is supposed to be the very emotional pacifist. So, his combat initiative, in that regard, is the lowest amongst the color gang. Blue, by all means, would rather arrive to a peaceful ending if he could help it, and he won't fight or aggravate someone that doesn't look like a threat. Even towards strangers, Blue doesn't see potential threats, but instead possible allies. Even if he does feel wary around them, or he's put in a position that he feels threatened, Blue assesses the situation based on risk aversion and reason. In episode 10 of Animator vs. Animation, Blue believed that by surrendering to Agent, he and his allies would be spared of any unnecessary conflict. We see him still stay down despite Red and Green getting beaten, possibly thinking that by showing that he and Yellow aren't threats and aren't hostile, this will all just be forgiven as a big misunderstanding. It's only when Yellow, who wasn't as combative, gets restrained that Blue realizes the gravity of the situation. And that's where the line of pacifism ends. A lot of Blue's fight scenes are derived from self-defense or ally-inflicted. A lot being ally-inflicted, honestly. Which lets us move on to how does Blue think when already in a fight. Blue's engagement mentality, just like the other sticks, is relatively straightforward. End the combat as fast as possible with as little damage to himself and his allies. Blue's engagement mentality, however, isn't consistent throughout his fights. How he feels about a combat highly depends on 3 factors. Number 1 is the hostility of the people he's fighting, number 2 is the danger he's in, and number 3 is if he's alone in a fight. When he's fighting with friends for fun, Blue takes on a balanced approach, especially when in environments with lower stakes or with a higher safety net. For example, in the Ultimate Minecart, he's not afraid to go all out in the name of victory because he knows it's all in good fun. But in PvP, when the stakes get a little higher and more personal, Blue tries to calm Green down before everything falls apart and Blue has to fight against the pissed off Yellow. Blue does, however, still engage in this tomfoolery, but you can see that he and Red just opt to beat Orange on the head with the invisibility potion. Blue knows the restraints of the game and is more than happy to join in on reckless and mildly painful sparring with his friends. He is actually also less adept at fighting his fellow sticks, even though we know that he is able to execute pretty brutal maneuvers. It's possible that he has his own mental restraints against his own allies, much like how the rest of them have for each other. It's a level of respect that they're just there for fun. We see him go toe-to-toe against Red the most for practice sparring, and we see him go even against Red in Bed Wars when it comes to sword fighting, and only gets knocked out when he loses focus off the bed and is shoved off the platform by Yellow. This, however, is different when he has to fight alongside his comrades against a common enemy. Blue is less restrained and fights with more vigor, but he still keeps a relatively leveled head during combat because he has the other sticks to rely on. Blue, when fighting with his allies, is more strategic and focuses on possible combinations he can do with them rather than going in alone like Red or Green. He also prioritizes sticking together with others to make sure that they fight as a group, in the which Blue is seen being extremely attentive of his fellow allies as being the only one that can transform them back. He's able to both defensively counter the witch's transmutation potions with his own and has incredible situational awareness to see who's currently changed and who's not. This reaction time makes it so that each stick's transformation back and forth is effortlessly seamless and doesn't break their team's combat momentum. This is why Blue is a very strong ally, not just because of his actual prowess, but because he thrives in a team environment. This is in contrast with someone like Red, who has at some points been too distracted with vitality to coordinate or have straight up friendly fired. And here's the last part of Blue's engagement mentality. It's when he's isolated and the stakes are at their highest. And that's the clearest aspect of Blue that I think is heavily underrated. The more stressed or placed in danger or isolated Blue is, the more rabid his attack patterns become. Conversely though, we see him lose control of his emotions if it's too much for him, causing him to shut down. Much like his calming effect on his allies have a calming effect on him. He's easily startled by others and doesn't take kindly when he's purposefully put in danger. However, his proclivity to being moved by stronger emotions like rage and fear make him quick to assume the worst of a situation, or worse, lash out. On the funnier side, he's killed Green before out of sheer panic. He's also chased after Red when the latter gets gunned down by snowballs by Orange and Green, only to get massacred himself. But on a more serious side, we see him shaking against the Dark Lord after seeing Red die, and when he loses himself after Green gets stabbed. During Animation vs. Addiction, where his relapses kick in, he's very physical with Orange. So, now let's see him in action. I'll be breaking down two of my personal favorite scenes for Blue that definitely showcased his potential. The first one is where we see him have to fight alone against the Piglin in episode 20. Blue realizes that he lost the crown while he was asleep and unfortunately has to fend off against the raging Piglin. Realizing that the Piglin have drawn their sword, he tries to evade the incoming Piglin, but to no avail as he's surrounded, forcing him to draw his sword to parry an incoming attack. He swings his weapon up to knock the Piglin back on the left, then crouches down to dodge an incoming arrow from the Piglin with a crossbow before swinging back up to counter another strike. He sees two of them targeting a weapon down and slamming it through his head, which forces him to do a kneeling high ground, which presses down the Piglin's weight on top of him. He struggles for a bit before releasing all that pressure back onto the Piglin with a cleaving strike. Mid-position, he blocks an incoming arrow with the flat front of the blade before moving sideways to do another hanging guard to use the weight of the Piglin's strike to redirect that same strike's power and throw the Piglins at each other. Blue parries another arrow by swinging upward, then completing that entire motion with a downward strike into another Piglin. Then the Hoglin shakes him off of its back and he goes tumbling to the other side, where he starts making a run for it. It's very important to note that Blue has no intention of actually hurting or killing the Piglin in this scene. We see this difference in intention immediately when he goes for the kill on the zombie Piglin. Blue's strikes are much harsher, where he jumps backwards and stabs the sword right into the zombie Piglin's stomach before raising his sword to tilt his body into a front kick to the zombie Piglin in front of him to knock it on its back. He then turns to slice the zombie Piglin behind him clean through its back before lunging straight into another one by jamming his sword into its torso, pulling it back just to ram it into another zombie Hoglin. Then he slashes through its head again for a clean kill before retreating the sword into a circular swipe right through the zombie Piglin's neck. Whenever Blue goes for the kill, he moves to break his enemy's balance and stabs into them while they're still disoriented. This makes sure that they don't have enough speed to block. Much like his previous attempts at murder, he goes for very vital organs such as the neck, face, and stomach. He physically stops himself from stabbing into another Piglin, having enough awareness to turn and elbow the Piglin away from him instead, then use that shove to throw himself at the zombie Piglin and slice upward through its torso. Blue assumes the ox position with the sword through the outside, but instead of stabbing it into the Piglin's face, he lowers his body to clash the sword into the Piglin's blade to break its balance. He propels himself back with that momentum to crash into the zombie Piglin and purposefully goes for its neck to kill it before lowering his stance from the other Piglin to throw it forward into the zombie Piglin. Blue, however, loses this fight by getting distracted with the child he wants to protect, which I think is a very Blue way of losing. So, here's another one where he constantly goes for the kill without any mercy. In Animation vs. Minecraft episode 36, we see him at his most feral, and where I think his strength best shines because he's uninhibitedly deadly. Blue throws a sword at Lancer's head and realizes that he doesn't actually have to play by the rules of Minecraft. With that, he gains unfound confidence to commit homicide. He starts by doing what works, throwing the sword at Lancer's face before getting beaten up twice. When he's knocked back, he hops onto the wall and uses his right leg to dive forward and roll underneath Lancer to grab the iron sword back. Mid-roll, he propels himself up to jump into the air and starts throwing the sword back at Lancer, but he's stopped by Tins mid-somersault. So he turns and hurls the sword back at Tins before getting bodied by Starlock, which interrupts his trajectory. Blue doesn't yield though and throws the sword back at Tins. He's accosted in the air by a group attack which sends him back and forth like a volleyball before he swaps to a fire charge and bombs the people under him, sending him to the other side and separating the players. Blue grabs onto the sword that's stuck to the ground without any hesitation and jumps straight into Spray's face to stab them right in the eyes. Blue latches onto him before propelling himself straight into Tin's to throw the sword right to their front. Blue rolls on the ground and catches the sword mid-air to throw it again at Tin's from the front, then another underhand throw that pushes Tin's back, which lets Blue jump onto their face to kick them backwards. Blue also equips another sword. This is enough to shove Tin's out of bounds, making Blue secure the first kill. Before Blue could get his bearings and recover from that jump properly, Spray sends a flurry of snowballs and silverfishes his way, which forces him to retreat. He slices down the silverfish without any problems and throws the iron sword straight into Spray, while running forwards to catch the falling stone sword. He dodges Sarlacc's hits by rolling downwards and stabbing the stone sword into the grass. He uses this as an axis to revolve around and build up the upward momentum to fly into Sarlacc and use them as a platform to stab straight into Spray, which he shoves back by barbarously stabbing into the chest. This doesn't kill Spray, but it does give Blue another platform to dodge an incoming fire charge from Lancer, which he uses to do a downward spinning strike. This lands him straight on Lancer's back, which he uses to stab multiple times into Lancer's face before kicking himself off of them and diving for the other sword. He runs straight into Sarlacc while deflecting the arrows without any problems before slashing through them with his left hand. He backflips off of them and does an impressive sword throw while still in the air, which sends the sword through Spray's incoming silverfish and into Spray. Spray tries to distract Blue with a silverfish, but Blue instantly swats it away while pursuing Spray. Blue reaches Spray, but he chucks the sword again into the newly teleported Sarlacc. Blue finishes off this combat by slicing through Spray, then kicking Spray into Sarlacc, sending Sarlacc over the edge before throwing his sword one final time at Spray to secure the kill. So anyway, considering that he's a stick that everyone's always nice to, there's a reason. In a series centered around characterization and combat, it's crucial to understand how an individual's fighting style intelligently conveys not only the character's strengths, but also motivations, flares, and passion. In this series, I'll be breaking down a character's core talents and appreciate their strong tactics and choreography throughout the fight scenes. What are they good at? What tools do they use? What makes them unique from others? And most importantly, what tricks do they have up their sleeves? So welcome to How Strong is Alan Becker's Stickfigures, where I break down a character's fighting style, skills, tactics, and combat movesets and mentalities, and analyze how these things improve their personal characterization. Last time I did a video on blue, which, whoa, and today we're talking about green. All 20 pages of this guy. Help me. The spotlight-stealing, dual-wielding maestro who will kill you while still looking good. Well, as good as you can look as a stickman, but I digress. Disclaimer, this isn't your average power scaling style of video where I'm taking in strength and isolation, and I also won't be putting numbers for the sake of proving superiority amongst characters. It's a dissection, where I'm using the scenes and the context of their personality to better understand why they fight a certain way. Also, it's not completely power that I'm after either. It's appreciating what that character can do and what aspect of their story is best reflected in their combat arsenal. So, let's begin. Green from Alan Becker's Stickfigure series is characterized as the socially adept, highly competent, competitive, and completionist combatant, while still having a heart of gold and sentimentality. Green is a theatrical one of the sticks, always wanting to show his best side to the audience through his talents for music, entertaining, and general people skills. But of course, the universe humbles him every now and then by genuinely pulling multiple pranks on him just to take him down a few notches, which is what makes him very endearing. But the question is, how strong is he? Now, because each of the sticks have a unique approach to their combat and have a different purpose narratively, it's crucial for me to say that the formats aren't always going to be one-to-one. Green gets the most individual fight scenes in the current series and is usually a solo performer in particular segments that just want to flex him. Even in larger group shots, he gets his individual moment to shine most of the time, giving me a lot of material to work with but also to scrutinize. And with that, let's start with combat physicality. Green's fighting style, on the surface, is best described as having the strongest emphasis on both dexterity and charisma. His fighting style isn't just about him winning, it's also about him putting his best foot forward. His stances are more defined, his movements are snappy and rhythmic as opposed to the ones that have more brawl-like elements, and even his antics in between have a dose of rhythmic theatricism. But in terms of actual combat prowess, Green shines the most as the group's most agile fighter. Green's fights usually showcase the four phases of dexterity: speed, where he genuinely just moves or runs faster than his adversaries; evasion, when he dodges out of the way of enemies, projectiles, or obstacles that he can see; elevation, where he uses acrobatic or aerial abilities to get better vantage points that are otherwise underutilized by other sticks; and interweaving, which is whenever he chains particular movements with his body to make the transition time between attacks feel seamless. Let's start with speed. When it comes to general speed, all of the sticks are objectively fast, but Green's speed is something that's constantly highlighted in his characterization. Compared to everyone else, with the exception of Blue's insane ability to turn a regular bow into a Gatling gun at some point I've stopped asking, Green has the fastest movement that enable his other forms of dexterity. Green overwhelms an enemy by moving faster than they can hit and hitting faster than they can move. Being the fastest in things is also highlighted in his personality. In Speedrun, he was crowned as the fastest to complete his challenge. In Cave Spider, his arachnophobia kicks in and he outsprints everyone else. And in the parkour, during the first challenge before they all start fighting each other, Green is the fastest to complete it. We also see that Green's adrenaline doubles his speed, especially when he's tense, as we see him panic against the Piglin. Green's speed is also what makes his fighting style the most graceful and rhythmic out of all of the sticks. He's able to get a lot more done on the battlefield just by executing his attacks faster. But speed is only the surface of his dexterity as we move on to the other three. Evasion is where Green's fight scenes shine the most because unlike the other characters that focus on a more front-heavy, kill-if-kill style of animation, Green has a mix of dodges where he's impressive because he feels untouchably nimble. This is best seen during the prank episode where he overwhelms Red, who tries to brute force his way to caking him. The problem is that Green's speed and evasiveness make it impossible for Red to actually land a blow. However, it's important to note that Green's evasion is not the same as blind reflexes. In combat, there are different kinds of reactions that a person has. They're dependent on a lot of factors, but for Green, I noticed that two are important for him to evade a target: vision and tension. Vision is, can you see what you're moving out of the way of? Green is great at reacting at enemies that he can see and have direct awareness of. Conversely, he's inconsistent in evading targets that surprise him when his guard is down, or if he's attacked at an angle he doesn't anticipate, or people he doesn't anticipate: red, yellow, blue, orange. Green's speed becomes his only crutch when trying to move out of the way during moments like this, but most of the time, Green doesn't dodge what he doesn't notice. The opposite of this limitation is actually the skulk sensor staff that Orange has in the Lucky Block staff episode. Even if Orange isn't paying attention or looking at the adversary, the staff makes it so that his hands or body are being dragged along with it to counterattack or dodge. The cakes on the side only trigger once, so with Green's agility, he's able to instinctively dodge them, but Red and the cakes falling from the sky are the intermittent patterns, which forces him to pay attention to Red the most. The only time he removes Red from his vision while Red's on the offense is when he turns around to kick Red in the face. This is also the case during the time Green got mauled by a goat. Green was dodging extremely well until he took his eyes off of it and got ran over. He also gets shot down by lightning in Lucky Block staff, is bombed to Kingdom Come by Blue in Ultimate Minecart, and is killed by Orange. He also doesn't see Yellow when Yellow Banzai kicks him during AVA 9. That doesn't discredit his achievements, of course. Thinking like that is far too black and white. But it gives a cool layer to Green's combat character. It also reestablishes the authenticity and stakes of his internal fighting style. While he's fast and nimble, he's not completely impervious. This is the case during their intro sequence against Primal. He doesn't know his opponent and where his opponent is and is relying on his reaction time to save him from getting stabbed. Which leads to the next point. Vision-based evasion is also accompanied by tension. Tension includes adrenaline and other emotions that could heighten your sense of urgency in combat. Going back to Primal, It's when Primal misses the first time that Green's adrenaline spikes and he's forced to now pay close attention to the fact someone's trying to stab him. And even in a lighter way, this includes just a general idea that someone is out to get you, like a cake. In calmer situations, Green's evasion is more so toned down depending on the context. Whenever he's sparring, he prefers taking direct hits at his friends instead of dodging to preserve the name of the game being a friendly combat. Because where's the fun in not hurting each other? Going back to the prank episode, because I think this showcases this very well, Green's not in any immediate hostile danger in all honesty, but his nonchalance and speed in thwarting Red comes from the fact that not only is he anticipating Red, he's in a more relaxed environment that lets him focus on a single task: evade Red. Conversely, Green can get very paranoid when in high-intensive combat, which greatly increases his ability to dodge out of fear or self-preservation. He doesn't even try to pose for a metaphorical camera because at this point, his goal is survival. But his evasive maneuvers are also dependent on who he's with, because when he's with allies, Green's priority isn't always to evade, but also to protect. If not getting hit means that someone else will, he'd rather throw himself in front of that person rather than dodging. Next up is Elevation, which I think is Green's more unique aspect compared to the other sticks. Green is the master of controlling the elevation he's fighting in and adapts the best when it comes to maneuvering around difficult terrain. He's the strongest of the sticks to weaponize heights, climbing, and shoving the most given his versatility with the fishing rod. Green is always depicted trying to find higher ground if he can during fights. Examples of this are when he's climbing on top of the building in Build Battle to fight the Wither, him swinging across the Nether to try and evade the Piglin, and also him trying to climb over the turret in PvP. Green has also used slime blocks and the ultimate minecart to jump over all of them during the final sequence, before getting sent to next week by Blue. Green also uses the high ground when evading the Piglin during parkour. He has also climbed up the walls of the fortress to get better vantage points on Purple to keep him from escaping. Whenever he's in team fights, Green's basic combos with allies include him being boosted to higher places. Green executes a combo with Blue during the end where he's tossed straight up into the Ender Dragon. And in the Influencer arc, he lets himself get boosted by Orange to grab onto the glitch Green. In Bed Wars, he asks an Iron Golem to throw him to the other side, he grabs a guy and throws him off of the ledge, he evades one of them by climbing up the ladder, and he makes a clutch save with an Ender Pearl. He also enjoys the Portal Staff with the Spiderweb Staff for maximum aerial mobility, as opposed to just flying like the rest of the sticks. This shows a level of expertise that relies more on dexterous skill as opposed to straight magic. He also uses the shield plus bomb tactic to try and impress Purple, much to his detriment. Green also enjoys teleportation. He utilizes the Ender Pearls on PvP to get a jump on Orange, and he also uses them when he was cornered by Yellow and Red during Bed Wars. And again, the Portal Staff. Green's prowess in fighting with elevation makes it so that no enemy is ever too high or too far from him. Keeping Green trapped or forcing him to fight in the same elevation is a great way of forcing him in a narrow playing field. Interestingly enough though, Green's also seen fumbling his balance at times when he's distracted. An example of this is in parkour, when Green fails to jump because Orange kicked the boat from under him, or Yellow bumping into him to try and move past him. This is also the case in Wipeout, where Green's already on the block and Orange jumps to the same block behind him, causing him to almost lose his balance had the ladder not grabbed onto him. Now the last phase of dexterity that Green shows in his attacks is when he combines technical skill with speed. Certain characters specialize in different levels of dexterity and strength-based fighting. Of course, all of the sticks have a pretty high baseline in their combat skills, with characters like Orange being great at picking them up naturally, and the others having more than average fighting capabilities due to their nature of being fighting sticks. However, not all fighting styles are the same. Orange, for example, is a straight strength-based fighter, where he relies on upper body strength most of the time to deliver slower but more powerful hits. Blue is an example of strength priority, dexterity complemented. He moves fast, but usually attacks with upper body punches and throws. Red is the perfect balance of both, capable of switching from a brawl-based fist-fighting style, then shift to an exclusively lower body sequence. Yellow is a dexterity priority fighter, who primarily prefers kicks and faster movement over strength of the swings. which is why he's much more proficient with leg-based maneuvers. The reason that I showed all of this is because green is what I'd classify as being in the middle of blue and yellow. Green's speed doesn't heavily rely on his upper body strength, but he does rely on a lot of upper body swings, meaning he hits a lot of smaller hits while using his speed to exacerbate micro-movement. Simply put, interweaving is what I define as putting a micro-action in between a bigger action so that your overall movement is highly efficient. This is what makes green's movements feel so seamless, because they transition so neatly into each other. Green can transition an action like jumping in the air or landing on your feet into an equally offensive action like kicking someone in the back or throwing their sword while they land. Green is also a momentum-based fighter. Green noticeably doesn't stop his movement even when he's landing or he's in the air. His fight with Primal showcases this the best when green is matched with an enemy that is significantly larger and front-heavy. That's what really makes green's agility deadly. If you try to force your way to him, he'll throw that force back. Strangely enough, this is best exemplified with him dodging red's kicks. Because red only focuses on exerting as much force as possible against green, green can correctly counter that speed with his own. And even worse, when red does land a hit, green masterfully returns that momentum back towards red and weaponizes red's own strength against him. This transfer of momentum makes it so that if you ever fight green, you're at a disadvantage if you're actually faster and stronger, but less reactive. Going back to his fight with Primal, green uses Primal's fast but heavy fighting style to his advantage. He uses the forces of the grab first to build up the momentum needed to backflip off of Primal's grip. Then he uses Primal's reckless lunge to trip him and discombobulate him before launching him off of God knows how high of a building. So, putting that all together, we have the fundamentals of green's fighting style. He maintains momentum by constantly being in motion, he interweaves attacks between dodges and vice versa, and he adjusts his stances based on his weapon. Which brings me to the next part of his combat physicality, and the style that separates him the most out of everyone else. This is because green's strongest specialty is being the weapons master of the group, capable of adapting to most of the fighting styles needed to wield different melee weapons. While each of the other sticks are equally proficient, green masters the potential of these weapons the most, having the ability to swap between them without any delay. This proficiency in adjusting his fighting style also makes it so that he can weaponize his body the best compared to the other sticks, like when he maximized the sugarcane's potential in The Witch to still be a formidable 1v1er. Green is also exceptionally skilled at unequipping weapons and requipping them, while smoothly retrieving them without sacrificing combo upkeep. Let's start with his first fighting style, one-handed lasso-based or string-based weaponry. The fishing rod is primarily used in two ways: to move green to and from difficult terrain, or to hook around enemies like a lasso and drag them down. In Ultimate Minecart, this is the primary way he kept orange down. Green uses a lot of circular movements with his fishing rod to build momentum, or he'd drag himself from one location to another to dodge. Green also uses the rod's line to cover larger distances, especially in weaponizing elevation. It's hard to predict which angle green would come from. He has also used chain-based weapons in the series like chain gauntlets or the spiderweb staff. When in teamfights though, the rod's line is also used to displace allies and put them in safer locations or closer to enemies for more opportune positions. Green also uses line-based weapons offensively to chain hurled projectiles at an enemy, like when he was chaining with red in Lucky Block's staff. One of his strangely prevalent maneuvers with the weapons is how often he wraps it around the creature's neck. For allies, he usually just grabs onto their back, but when it comes to enemies, he chokes the hook or the actual line around their neck and pulls them backwards. This is something he does for Orange on Ultimate Minecart, and we see Orange pull back on the rope. Actually, Green's fighting style with it is an amalgamation of everyone else's way of using it. The next weapon that I want to break down is any elongated weapon that covers more area than an average sword. This is the weapon that gets the least recognition but the one that alters his fighting style the most, and allows Green to do rapid piercing strikes at the enemy with a larger reach, but it sacrifices his overall mobility because he only plays within the confines of the weapon's length. However, it's also the fighting style that covers the most space around him. To fully appreciate his mastery of this weapon type, let's break down his fight against the Allen cursor. Green starts off with a dive with the spear into the cursor. From the single motion alone of him jumping, he's already managed to swing the weapon twice. When green lands, he uses the glaive's length to spin the weapon from its center axis. He uses the weapon's force built up from spinning to cleave it down towards the mouse. He continues that crescent trajectory to spin the glaive again to rebuild the lost momentum. Green uses the force to start his movement. He jumps back to brace himself, then runs towards the cursor with that continuous momentum. Then, with the momentum built up and his stance done with enough thrust, he jumps into the air and throws the weapon at the cursor. Alan dodges though, but we see that green doesn't stop moving the same way red and blue were once they were countered. Instead, he keeps going and actually uses Alan spinning the glaive to his advantage. He times the catch in a way that the head is still towards the cursor and nearer to the ground, which lets him counter-spin and launch himself in the air using the tip of the blade. Because he and the weapon have been in continuous motion, his momentum has been constantly preserved throughout the whole thing. So he uses the rest of the movement to spin himself on the glaive's axis to position himself closer. It's also nice to note that Green's next movements are slower than his first ones after his entire sequence was finally interrupted by the other sticks. Realistically, as much as we can imply on this kind of show, it's because Green already lost the momentum and has to build it back up if he wants to do that same chain of attacks. The next weapon that he utilizes a lot is the sword. Green's one-handed swordplay is based on fast swings, and he almost always prefers fighting with only one hand on the hilt when dueling. Green's one-handed strikes are also designed to chain into themselves. His stances also change depending on how he's hitting. When he's hitting faster, his body is much closer together, but when he wants to exert more force, he takes a wider stance. Though, there are times that he goes for the two-handed grip. This is when he's blocking or when he has to deliver stronger attacks that require much more force. Then we move on to Green's more prevalent style. Green's dual-wielding prowess comes from how much he turns his body. Much like his logic with the elongated weapons, Green tries to cover as much space around him as possible whenever he's dual-wielding. And the two weapons are usually meant to interweave with each other. If he blocks with one, he strikes with another. His dual-wielding combos come in two ways, sword and sword, and a fishing rod with another melee weapon. The difference with how he duels with sword and sword is that his general axis is with himself, meaning that it's his body, not the weapons, that are spinning in and of itself. He also moves around less when using the two weapons, as if he's anticipating that combat is meant to strike the enemy down mano-a-mano. Because his fighting style is defined by speed, he uses the two swords to lessen the downtime between the time he blocks and the time he strikes, making him able to chain attacks without exhausting either hand and to execute successive attacks. This is why in the parkour, he was also paired with a pig that was equally fast and also dual wields. The other character that actually does this style of swordplay is Orange, who has used his body before as a spinning top to kill multiple enemies at once or to parry multiple shots at once. Green's second form of dual wielding is with the fishing rod and sword combo. Green's fighting style when like this covers so much more space but with less prolonged contact, because the point isn't just to exchange blows, it's also to immobilize. This style also allows him to rod multiple enemies together with the string of the rod to keep them clustered for his strikes. And because a fishing rod can cover more distance than a sword, this enables Green to latch onto farther enemies faster and lessen his travel time. His combination of single target immobilization coupled with unparalleled chain attacks can discombobulate and overwhelm any inexperienced fighter, and that's what makes him very deadly. But since we're talking about characterization, I think it's also important to think about his combat mentality. Combat mentality is what I define as how the character thinks during the different phases of combat, and this is usually where the crux of their character's storytelling is. What are their personal inhibitors or activators in their personality that change their fighting style? Again, I'm not just interested in gauging the power or strength of the character, but also the context of why they do what they do. Initiative, which is how they start the combat, engagement, which is how they think in combat, and escalation is how they resolve a combat, either by ending it with their fists or by talking. Green's initiative mentality is what I genuinely think is the best during serious situations. During moments of stress or panic, he's very quick to react and start the initiative to gather the others or defend someone else. Green is the first responder who almost always follows the other person in the lead to make sure they're safe. This is exemplified in the way that he usually runs or engages after red like in The King and in AVA 10, and how he ran after Purple in the Noteblock universe. Green is extremely attentive to the emotions of his other allies in combat and rarely actually instigates stake-worthy fights. Emphasis on stakes. When in situations that have actual danger, Green's demeanor is much more restrained and calculating. In parkour, he shifts immediately to a proactive initiative when he remembers that Purple still has Red's pig. He also makes sure that Yellow's okay first before they can relax. In the Dolphin Kingdom, he takes the initiative to go ahead the team to look for Orange, and in cases like the chef and the box, he only engages when Red does. Green isn't a hostile character, and actually, if he's given an option to go for peace, he usually will take it. Even when he's getting bullied, he trusts his friend's judgment to delay any altercation as much as possible. His patience for Bob was massive just because he was Orange's creation. However, his initiative mentality also changes depending on two things: how much danger the situation actually poses to him and his friends, and if there are any emotional stakes that are involved. Because when he's sparring with his friends, or when there's an ego on the line, that's a different story. First is that Green is a showman-style fighter, motivated by the want to win, impress, and be the star of the show. He's not opposed to taking down his friends for fun if it means winning a competition for as long as he deems that the environment is controlled. Green, in these situations, is almost always the first one to pull out a weapon on them and escalate the combat to a much higher level. He's also not opposed to initiating combat with his friends if he thinks that it's for the glory of a competition. But that's honestly just all of them. It's a form of respect to each other's combat capabilities and the trust in their friendship that this is all just consented violence. Also, he's pretty chill about getting murdered twice in PvP and just makes sure to return the favor to everyone else. However, Green shifts gears almost immediately when he realizes that the situation has gone a bit too far or has lost that joviality. In the lightsaber battle, when Red and Blue panic and get their lightsabers stuck, Green goes into older brother has to fix this mess mode to turn off his lightsaber and move to turn off theirs as well, but not before they all explode. Furthermore, in the parkour, when the atmosphere immediately changes and he feels that something's wrong, Green gets suspicious and starts asking questions instead of gloating. On a more humorous side though, Green's not opposed to resorting to violence when his hard work is being tainted or diminished by an opposing party. He tried being gentle with the color gang during build block battle after they interrupted him and inevitably lost his cool. He also got mad at the silverfish who was just trying to enjoy the concert. And he still failed to keep his cool even after the other sticks realized that maybe fighting the army of silverfishes isn't the smart idea. But he doesn't like starting genuine conflict. This change is evident in the influencer arc when he immediately tries apologizing when he realizes that his friends are actually mad at him. Conversely, when the emotional stakes are much higher, like how Purple betrayed him, Green is genuinely pissed off and doesn't hesitate to beat him down for it. Green's engagement mentality is rather straightforward too. In fights where danger is genuinely present, Green prioritizes the well-being of his allies first and foremost before himself. Compared to the other sticks though, he is the most put together during combat. He doesn't get as shaken to an extent of blind rage, and his stamina is also significantly consistent. Green also doesn't hesitate to incapacitate, harm, or throw someone off of a building when he feels like his allies are in danger. But it's in the de-escalation mentality that I think Green differs from the others. Emotionality is one of Green's bigger character highlights. For Green, an enemy backing down is a sign of peace as it is. He doesn't immediately fight Purple until he showed signs of running away, and when they do meet again in the Noteblock universe, he doesn't resolve to violence even if he could. And by this point, Yellow already gave up on Purple. In the influencer arc, though a bit more introspective, Green does look inwardly to find the solution to the glitch YouTube videos, which not only pacify his enemy, but also gives him something to think about. Green's multifaceted nature, despite being portrayed as egotistical and a perfectionist, are what makes his characterization all the more compelling. When he's at his wit's end, his priority is to save others. Okay, so Similar to what we did with blue, it's time to finally break down green in action. This one is for a fight where I think all of his weapon masteries are best showcased, specifically in his recent one in AVM 37. The fight starts with green using a netherite sword to parry the little guy's wooden sword. And you can see that this is just a fun little game to him the way that he wields it. Compared to his other fights where he usually uses a normal grip, here he twirls the hilt of the blade by the axis of his wrist, and swinging the sword down onto stand 1, which knocks it back. Green doesn't finish completing that downward strike though before coming back up to slash the sword again through the stand's front, and then hoist himself up by the leg to kick himself up from the armor stand to launch himself into another one. He uses that as a platform to roll in the air to initiate a twirl kick for the one in the back. His passive leg lands on the stand first, which disorients the stand's lunge and gives Green a clear path to complete his kick with the active leg. As before he even lands, he's already chucking the netherite sword into the back of the stand as he's equipping his axe. He completes the sequence by arcing his back to stabilize himself while simultaneously driving that axe into the enemy behind him as his hand was naturally coming down to balance himself. Can I appreciate how this attack goes? Green's main line of action, when you're just going to put it in a sentence, is he launches himself off and he lands on the other side. But in that line alone, he's shoved one enemy, kicked another one, threw a sword, equipped an axe, and then drilled that axe into someone's head, all while never losing that initial pattern of movement. Green's next sequence is removing the axe from the stand's face by using his foot to pull the stand in with him as he rolls on the ground. This sends the stand flying to the opposite side while Green pushes himself up. But before he completely stands up, he does an underhand throw of the axe into the newly respawned stand, which knocks it back. Green continues the roll while cleanly grabbing the wooden sword from the ground, then he finishes it off by slicing through another enemy before cleanly transitioning the motion of standing up from the roll. He sends a kick into the stand and turns that jump into a spin by hurling the sword at the enemy behind him. We can see him rapidly switching to a fishing rod with his other free hand, which he uses to hook onto the stand's neck. Instead of landing, he continues the path by reeling himself into the stand and sliding underneath it to trip it with its feet. He uses his path to grab onto the netherite sword, and then without any lag whatsoever, he instantly pulls himself again to the same stand to kick it right in the stomach. Green uses that kick to push himself on top of the stand and roll forward with it, using the rod to grab it by its neck to go along with him in the rotation. Green kicks the stand off and somersaults back onto the ground. But in the same arc that the fishing rod takes, the moment it unhooks from the first stand's neck, Green aims it in a way that he can swing it again at the newcomer. He uses the travel time to reposition himself and use the active leg to do a back kick into his target. But he still uses the momentum from that sequence to cover more distance and stab into the one in the back. Green's not yet done though as he presses forward, throwing the armor stand off of him and somersault over this armor stand and launch himself into the one in the back. He doesn't linger though, as when the stand he's on top of starts tilting, he balances himself and jumps again, slicing through it with the hook of the fishing rod. If you notice, the fishing rod was cast in a way that connects to the stand that Green backflipped off of. So when Green goes for the retreat, he wastes no time in disconnecting himself from it as the fishing rod reels him back to the next target. We get a cut here with Green standing planted on the ground and a stand charging at him. He dodges by rolling to the front as the stand tries to swing high, which lets Green balance himself by staying low. He sprints to that stand and swings high, and while he's still in the air, he equips his trident. His stance adjusts accordingly when using the weapon as opposed to when he was just using the fishing rod. When he had the rod, he needed to be able to move back and forth quickly, which is why he usually only landed with one foot. When he had the sword, he kept his position relatively small and tight. But when he has the trident, his stance is firmly planted on the ground. He has no need to conserve momentum, so his legs are wide, which lets him maximize the reach of the weapon. It's also important to note that Green's attacks with the trident are much more strength-focused as opposed to his previous attack, which relied on him being too nimble to get locked down. Green wastes no time from recovering from that swing to throw the trident into the stand in the back before hot-swapping back to the sword and then equipping an axe as his offhand. You can see that he immediately retreats his legs in a way that closes his stance when he's dual-wielding. He cuts the stand clean through its head that if this hadn't been a stick figure animation, I'm sure would be rated 18 for gore, ramming his sword through the stand's back and killing it. Green is an efficient killer and doesn't let the sword linger for too long before pulling it out. which is enough time for the other stand to take the weapon and throw it towards him. Green anticipates this and unequips both the sword and the axe, giving him the free hand to grab the trident. Rather than fighting against the trident's trajectory though, he redirects it instead backwards into the charging stand before stabbing it in the chest. All in all, Green is definitely my favorite stick to watch when it comes to general aesthetics. And his choreography is always so fluid that it's such a treat to watch. Every good action series must abide by the fundamentals of the side characters and antagonists, because even if a character is strong, what good is strength that isn't challenged in a meaningful and interesting way? And today, we're going to look into one of Alan Becker's stick figures that I think displays a great relationship between character backstory and character fighting style. Today, we're breaking down Purple, the resident schemer with a mended past and the master of aerial elevation and combat. Purple, as a character, differs from Green and Blue because his storytelling is progressive, and it shows in the little details in his combat characterization. But today, we're going to be talking about how he fights, which is very interesting because Purple is one of the main characters in the series that wasn't created to fight. Unlike the Second Coming, or Orange, that had a history of power dynamics in the past, or Green, Blue, Yellow, and Red for being created exclusively for a fighting game. And that's where I think it all gets interesting. So welcome to How Strong is Purple, the third part of the series where I cover the tactics, attitudes, and movesets in combat of the characters in Alan Becker's stick figure series, as well as salient character themes that amplify or explain why he does what he does. Disclaimer: this isn't your average power scaling style of video where I'm taking in strength and isolation, and I also won't be putting numbers for the sake of proving superiority against characters. It's a dissection, where I'm using the scenes and the context of their personality to better understand why they fight a certain way. Also, it's not completely power that I'm after either. It's appreciating what that character can do and which aspect of their story is best reflected in their combat arsenal. So, let's begin. Purple from Alan Becker's stick figure series was first introduced in the episode The Nether. He's the first stick that we meet that doesn't come from the sister series, Animation vs. Animator. He was intriguing back then because he introduced us to the possibility of sticks existing beyond the confines of Alan Becker's computer or web browser. Of course, we already had that idea, with what RGBY not being created by Alan, but more so that this stick doesn't have a defined home. Purple was also a character that sparked intrigue because he interacted with Minecraft the same way that other sticks did. And also because the village was set in a MacBook rather than a PC. I also find it cool, albeit probably accidental, that the color organizer tag doesn't have green and blue even though the Mac default makes it a point to have them. Purple's characterization starts off as a haughty leader that mildly learns the importance of gratitude before going back on his word and betraying Green and Blue. That is, until he pays dearly for his crimes and is sent away. Season 3 and Animation vs. League of Legends become pivotal parts of Purple's character, showing us his more cunning and conniving side, but also a side that was broken by terrible pasts and dysfunctional relationships. We get to see more fight scenes with him, especially against other sticks. So, how strong is he? Let's start with combat physicality. Purple's fighting style is a twofold system. He's a brawl-centric fighter that has a good mix of acrobatic and athletic capabilities, but he mostly focuses on punching combinations unlike other characters that are equally proficient in switching between punching or kicking. Purple mainly uses kicks for disengaging, like when he shoves Red off of him and when he kicks Green off in parkour. Purple's kicks are also a twofold process rather than a single strike. He kicks with a primary leg, then closes the distance between himself and his enemies. Then he uses that lunge to pull himself forward and step on them as a platform with the other leg. But there are times that Purple uses the kicks offensively, such as when he knees Red's stomach or when he kicks Red in the neck. He doesn't charge, however, with kicks the same way Green and Yellow do. Instead, he focuses on upper body punches and throws. His speed and flight are meant to complement his style of punching people in the face. He shoves Red's foot off of him, he is able to counter-grab Orange mid-drop and drag him across Blue's garden, and he throws Orange off of him when he catches him. Purple is a master at reducing an enemy's combo upkeep, usually by catching them. Combo upkeep is how many hits and blocks you can do in a sequence without getting discombobulated, and Purple does his best to disengage from a situation by delivering big blows in a short amount of time. However, he himself doesn't maintain combo upkeep, prioritizing quality of hits rather than quantity of hits. So think about it like this. If green's a fighter that interrupts combo upkeep because he throws the force back at you, purple's a fighter that interrupts combos by breaking you down. He won't give you an inch of reaction time because his punches try to do as much damage as possible in a short amount of time. This is how he was trained to fight at a young age. He's force on force, but that strength comes in bursts rather than consistency. If you notice, his offensive contact time with red and orange is relatively short, and significantly shorter than when the other sticks spar with each other. Purple fights like he's in a boxing ring, and I really like that fighting style because it's so raw, and he focuses almost exclusively on the face, jaw, head, and joints. Purple is also really good at adapting to effects or movements that require body movement changes, like extra powers. This means that when Purple is subjected to an effect that requires a physical mastery of how your body moves, Purple is quick to adapt. A smaller example of this is his Elytra. He masters the concept of flying really quickly and doesn't show signs of struggling with it. But on a larger scale, this is shown in how he chains his combo attacks in Animation vs League of Legends by expertly shifting between their abilities. In this fight, he uses Lux's laser beam to shoot orange down, then he immediately swaps to Thresh's hook to close the distance and step on orange. You know, Purple really likes stepping on people. Then, when orange slams down back first, Purple shocks them with Blitz's shockwave, which sends orange flying. He suffers an attack point blank to the face. Then Purple uses Brand's Ring of Fire to blow orange up before he can even land, delivering a final Lee Sin kick straight into his ass, which sends him flying. Purple shares a very similar trait to Green's fighting style, and it's weaponizing elevation and terrain. Purple is almost always depicted climbing onto higher grounds whenever he's in a combative state, such as when he almost declares war on Green and Blue, or when he uses the Elytra to fly away. Heights are generally a character theme of his throughout the story, wanting to achieve higher levels of success to prove his worth to someone that didn't see it. In combat though, his Elytra enables the other sticks to get to better heights, and he's seen supporting them by carrying or catching them. The Elytra helps them cover longer distances without having to sacrifice their own stamina. He also uses flight in the speed run by using a bamboo paper glider as a substitute. Purple's flight unlocks a new territory of movement for himself where it's hard to damage him unless you want to sacrifice your own balance. Purple's flight also means that he can attack at angles that are least expected, like grabbing someone in the back of the neck. This level of mobility forces enemies to grab onto him if they want to damage him, risking getting thrown off. Conversely, Purple loses against enemies with good aerial control or have the ability to throw him off of his trajectory. However, one crucial point about Purple is that he doesn't have the same resilience as stick figures that are created exclusively for combat. It's important to note that Purple's past, with what little we can garner, doesn't have the same concept of fighting rooted in his creation. This is vital. In the Alan Becker stick figure universe, a creator's intention of making a stick figure bleeds into their general abilities, personality, and arbitrary power levels. This is also the case with Purple and the Color Gang. The Color Gang are decided from the very beginning to be fighter sticks, and it not only bleeds in how naturally proficient they are in training themselves, but also how they adapt to environments that overwhelm them numerically or physically. Contrast this with Purple, who was meant to have a loving family and was only trained to be that way because of his father. I find this important because it's a very good world-building element, and it sets the precedence of power when characterizing stick figures. Resilience in combat, in Purple's case, has two core differences from the others: stagger and stamina. Starting with stagger, or the proclivity to being staggered. Being staggered in a combat context is defined as losing your balance, knocked off, or stumbling. This is vital because fast-paced combats rely on removing minute openings that can be weaponized against you. Fighters like Green, for example, weaponize the smallest openings in an enemy's attacks, relying on micro-movements to break stances and punish enemies who have slower reaction times. Being prone to getting staggered also means that you have slower recovery times. Say I knock you over with a pan, how long will it take for you to get up from that vulnerable position? The question for stagger is how well can you react to opposing forces? Purple has a hard time maintaining stances or chain attacks when an opponent is on the offensive, and he has a hard time executing prolonged counterattacks. One example of this is against Red and Orange. When Red starts his initiative, Purple constantly stumbles backward when Red is on the offensive. He tries to catch Red's movements and punch him back, but Red's kicks are far too fast that Purple's wind-ups are interrupted. Additionally, his recovery time being slow against Green is what made him struggle so hard during this fight. Green was always able to capitalize on the fact that Purple's reaction time was lagging. However, Purple is acutely aware of this lacking. He adapted his fighting style to deliver short bursts of large forces before he could get staggered. You can't get staggered if the enemy themselves are already too disoriented to actually hit you. Or just don't get hit with the force in the first place by being good at dodging. Next is stamina. Stamina in combat is how consistent your movements are without you getting winded. Longer stamina means longer combos and longer contact time. We see that he tries to make direct combos as short as possible, and if he has the option to self-preserve, he will. We also see him do a full combo in the King and start breathing heavily. This is actually what made me go back to all of his fight scenes. Purple has the shortest combo upkeep time compared to the other sticks. He engages, then disengages much more frequently compared to the others instead of opting for sustained combat. Even when he's alone in speedrun, most of his tactics rely on him alleviating the bodily stress from him. I want to emphasize this point not because I think Purple is weak, but I think Purple provides an interesting counter perspective to the cast. Compared to the others, he almost feels the most natural. He gets tired, he's much more practical with his resources, and he has open weaknesses. When other characters can get ragdolled much faster or have nearly godlike resistance to damage, it's such a breath of fresh air to see a character who has to rely on disengage tactics as well. When you're fighting someone, knowing when not to engage and to preserve your energy is as crucial as knowing when to exert it. This is why I think Purple is a resourceful fighter even though he has been overpowered by the others before. And that brings me to his general intelligence, which I think is the best part of his combat characterization. For a character that has such a front-heavy, in-your-face, die-already style of brutish fighting, he's also connivingly elusive. He's a tactician that can weaponize the psychological hooks of a person. In parkour, it was their want for competition, and in the prank, it was Green lowering his guard after making it seem like everything was fine. Even in speedrun, he doesn't rely on actually harming the dragon, but making it go away with a fake replica. Purple can also hack other systems in his favor, like how he hacked their League of Legends game. When he has a goal, he sticks to it without wasting time dilly-dallying on others. He tries to fly away instead of directly engaging with Green, he doesn't prolong combat with Orange and Red if he doesn't have to, and he goes straight for the punch to King Orange to get the staff. But where I think Purple's character shines the most is the significance of fighting in his life. And this is where I go back to the other part of this fighting style analysis. Combat mentality is what I define as how the character thinks during the different phases of combat. And this is where the crux of their character's storytelling is. How do they think during combat, and what are the personal inhibitors or activators in their personality that change their fighting style? However, Purple's analysis requires a bit more character scrutiny compared to the other sticks, particularly because he went through a massive change while the others were relatively comfortable with how they engaged and approached fights. Let's start with combat engagement. Purple's upbringing contextualizes a lot of what he sees as combat. He's simultaneously someone that gets agitated or stressed when things aren't going to plan, and he results to confrontation when he can't think of a way to scheme his way out, but he also panics and avoids combat. He doesn't inherently avoid combat out of pacifism, but he avoids it out of practicality. And it's when his goals and personal achievements are challenged that he takes on a direct approach, sometimes blinded by pure ambition or spite. Considering his nature as a stick figure who has lived and been with other sticks in the other world, he also wasn't surprised or shocked about Blue and Green's existence. He's just kind of passive and mildly confused of why are you people in my house? We are aware that the Minecraft game is at least advertised in Stick City, so Purple probably already had the idea that if he could, someone else could as well. It was only when Green and Blue started unknowingly gaining the favor of the people that Purple started getting aggressive. And his first verdict was to throw them into prison. He doesn't lose that quality even after his reformation. Purple participates in their for fun contests like the speedrun challenge, or in how he enables Red's antics by actively suggesting a complete plan to prank Green rather than talking Red down. Purple, however, is what I define as a very ego-based engager. He fights the most brutally when not only the most confident, but most assertive. But the converse of that is also true. When Purple is put in positions of hesitation, he becomes evasive and attempts to disengage himself from the situation rather than full-on confronting it. This was the case when he loses or is in a lesser position of control in the conversation. Green's assertiveness during both times where Purple's confronted are great examples of this. Purple avoids confrontation when he feels physically and emotionally threatened or lost, often manifesting in how he runs away. In a way, this duality is a manifestation of his past transgressions that never truly went away. However, he also adopts a double-down mentality that complements this hesitation well. This proclivity is known as the escalation of commitment. According to Kelly and Milkman, escalation of commitment is a risk whenever a decision maker commits resources to a course of action, which is an investment. Whether there is resistance or a failure to do that investment, they double their efforts and possibly take an even worse or more damaging route without weighing the alternatives. This is usually done because of self-justification, risk aversion, or confirmation bias. This is also the case when he almost goes for a drastic approach with blue and green, and when he sacrifices them in the end, and when he doubles down against orange by eating all of the champion data. Conversely, this behavior of all or nothing is also what explains why he suddenly turned around to stop orange. He commands the Baron Nashor to try and stop the pursuit even though he was this close to winning. At this point, it wasn't the matter of victory, this was a matter of ego. How could you possibly let someone backdoor you like that in a game? And unfortunately a reality of playing League of Legends in low elo. People stop pushing just because one guy started entering the base even though they can end. Okay, this hits way too close to home. He also doubles down on his commitment to the king after he gets betrayed and dumped for nothing even though the king promised that they would rule together. And this is also the case when he ultimately decides to sacrifice himself against King Orange during the final stand. Purple has an attitude of going to the next extreme for his goals, usually fueled by emotional catalysts, either success or sacrifice. This kind of attitude to combat is beautifully contested by Green, who shows him that taking on two complete extremes to your actions and defining them by polarizing opposites isn't healthy. And slowly but surely, Purple is having fun with the extremities of combat, and he's slowly seeing them as a pastime rather than a direct approach. Now we move on to Purple's frame-by-frame analysis. Purple's frame-by-frame is going to be different compared to Green and Blue's because his fights are shorter, and unlike the other sticks, he doesn't have a lot to choose from. The core distinction about Purple's fights are that they're emotionally driven, so the actions of the other people around him, especially in Season 3, are as important as his own. Green notices Purple trying to pull out a firework, which causes him to engage. Purple dodges the first grab, but Green immediately pivots and drags Purple down by the leg. Purple is slammed onto the wall and dragged down as Green pushes his entire force into Purple and beats him in the face. Purple, however, focuses on disengaging from Green by targeting how imbalanced Green is as Purple shoves Green's foot off of the platform. As Green tries to get his footing, Purple kicks him in the stomach and he tries to fly off. Purple tries to propel himself off of the same wall and he's able to dodge Green's hook with a front flip, but Green power runs on the wall to try and match Purple's elevation. Purple is given no time to think as Green jumps to him and he punches him in the face. Purple can't catch himself fast enough as Green grabs him by the foot and Purple struggles. Purple is dragged all the way and slammed down. Purple tries to fight back, but Green catches up to him. He gives an unstable strike that Green shoves off immediately, as Purple high blocks Green's punch and he gracefully dodges Green's back kick. Purple flies to the far wall, which lets him dodge Green's forearm strike, but Green has no lag time as he shoots a fishing rod to Purple and he capitalizes on that small millisecond of Purple trying to get his footing. That's more than enough as Green reels himself to the other wall. Purple doesn't recover fast enough as Green grabs him by the neck with the arm, and Purple is flipped backwards. As Purple struggles to stand up, Green's already done charging his pommel and he's too fast for Purple to react to. Green's stability lets him combo the next punches, and Purple can't counterattack as Green punches him thrice in the face and once in the jaw, before he's punched in the stomach and bashed in the nape. This is where the fight ends. I want to use this scene to showcase the difference in technical skill between both of them, because even though Purple wasn't necessarily trying to go on a head-on fight, it doesn't discount the disparity, and the devil is always in the details. Green's transition time is seamless between the moments where he is dodged or parried, and because Purple doesn't capitalize those windows fast enough, Purple is almost always on the reactive. Conversely, Green is able to abuse Purple's staggered openings by overwhelming him with continuous barrages. This goes back to my first point about Purple having a low resistance to opposing offensive forces, which usually force him to be on the initiative or on the disengage. And I want to hone the idea that this is what makes fights complex. While the usual bloodbath or for fun fights can scratch the power itch every now and then, seeing fumbles and disparities are equally important in this kind of series, because the beauty of Alan Becker's Stickfigures is that it respects the boundaries of power. Not all characters that are depicted as OP are always guaranteed to win, and not all powerful abilities are free. Not all fighters play by the same rules either, with some either being faster, stronger, or smarter. Purple's fights are compelling not only because he's a formidable fighter with potential, and even if he struggles, he does his best to win. This complements his story really well and how he had to constantly climb up to get to that arbitrarily reinforced perception of strength. And this is what I want the How Strong Is series to emphasize, not just for Purple, but also for the other characters. It's not just how strong are you, it's what does that strength mean to you. Anyway, I'm Mushi, and this has been How Strong Is Purple.